It reflects how incomplete and fragile the mainstream narrative really is. More importantly, it deflects attention from the possibility that a lost human civilization, not an alien one, could have achieved these feats. By relegating all alternative views to the realm of science fiction, legitimate theories get buried under ridicule. The alien narrative may be a red herring, an entertaining distraction that draws eyes away from a far more uncomfortable possibility. That we humans had once reached a level of sophistication we no longer understand, and that something wiped it away, leaving only stone monuments and a million unanswered questions. So maybe it's time to stop asking who came from the stars and start asking what we've forgotten right here on Earth. The Great Pyramid is the most studied ancient structure in the world, and yet, in 2017, scientists discovered something no one expected. A massive void hidden above the Grand Gallery, completely sealed off and untouched for millennia. Detected using muon tomography, a particle imaging technique that sees through solid rock, this chamber is roughly the size of a commercial airliner. And yet, no one knows what's inside. There's been no rush to explore it. No robots sent through a borehole, no probes, no follow-up. Just silence. Why? Some say it's caution. Others suspect institutional hesitance, because if what lies inside challenges the established timeline or exposes an unknown function of the pyramid, it could upend everything. And the void isn't alone. A second anomaly, also undisturbed, was detected in the same study. Add that to the so-called air shafts that point directly at specific stars, too narrow for ventilation, too precise to be accidental, and you start to see the outline of something more than a tomb. Something more than symbolic. A design built with purpose we still don't grasp. What if these hidden spaces weren't for burial or storage at all, but part of an internal system, a machine, a library, or a ritual mechanism? And what if the reason no pharaoh is buried inside is because the pyramid wasn't built for the dead, but by and for those trying to preserve something or someone? With every unexamined chamber, we're reminded, we don't just lack answers, we might be ignoring the right questions. And perhaps the greatest secrets of Giza aren't buried beneath the sand, but locked behind doors we already know exist. The story we've been fed for generations is dramatic and brutal. Legions of slaves, whipped into submission, hauling massive stones under a punishing sun to serve the ego of a god king. It's the image that's made into textbooks, films, and museum exhibits. But recent discoveries tell a radically different story. One that makes the slave narrative look more like historical propaganda than fact. Excavations of workers' villages near Giza reveal evidence of permanent housing, organized labor rotations, on-site bakeries, fish distribution systems, and even medical clinics capable of treating serious injuries. These people weren't slaves, they were skilled laborers, artisans, and engineers working in highly structured teams. Their burial sites were found near the pyramids themselves, a level of honor that no slave would have received. Many were buried with meat, beer, and symbolic tools, suggesting pride, respect, and status. But this revelation leads to an even more unsettling question. If they were skilled, organized, and respected, where did they get their knowledge? The techniques required to quarry, transport, and precisely place multi-ton blocks would have demanded a level of engineering literacy that didn't just emerge overnight. No training manuals have been found. No step-by-step plans, and no transitional prototypes, no half-finished pyramids that show how this learning curve evolved. Could these workers have been following inherited instructions? Ancient oral traditions? Reverse engineering a structure they didn't design, but were tasked to complete or restore? And if the Great Pyramid wasn't an original construction, but a restoration or reconstruction of something far older, preserved through ritual and repetition, that would explain the reverence, the secrecy, and the lack of innovation in later pyramids, which steadily decline in precision and durability. The myth of the whip-crack slave isn't just wrong. It may be a deliberate oversimplification, because the real story isn't about cruelty. It's about legacy, and the hands that shaped the pyramids might have been guided by knowledge far older than Egypt itself. When we call the Great Pyramid an architectural marvel, we're not being poetic, we're being literal. The structure is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60th of a degree. Its base is nearly perfectly level, within less than an inch across 13 acres. The difference in length between each side? Mere centimeters. And the internal proportions? They encode mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio, long before they were supposedly discovered. This isn't coincidence. This is engineering, deliberate, precise, and executed on a scale so vast that modern builders still struggle to replicate it. And yet we're expected to believe this level of mastery arose from a Bronze Age society. With no formal understanding of advanced mathematics, no high-precision instruments, and no written evidence of theoretical planning, even more curious is the lack of any kind of development arc. Civilizations don't usually leap from mud brick tombs to megalithic structures of surgical precision. Where's the experimental phase? Where are the partial failures, the learning curves, the trial and error designs? They don't exist. The Great Pyramid appears at the very beginning of Egypt's architectural record in its most advanced form. Later pyramids, far cruder, structurally unstable, and poorly aligned, come after. That's not evolution. That's decline. Which begs the question, who were the original engineers? Were they Egyptians in name only, inheriting forgotten blueprints from an earlier age? Or were they outsiders, initiates of a now-lost science, carrying forward traditions from a vanished world? Some researchers believe ancient architects functioned more like a priesthood than a construction crew, keepers of sacred geometric knowledge, applying math, astronomy, and acoustics not for utility, but for resonance, energy, and alignment with cosmic forces. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. The Great Pyramid wasn't just built, it was orchestrated. And the minds behind it knew something we don't. Imagine Egypt not as an origin point, but as a convergence. A meeting place for minds, methods, and mysteries carried from far older cultures. Recent DNA studies on skeletal remains from pyramid-era workers suggest significant genetic diversity, traits linking them to regions in the Levant, the Caucasus, and possibly even the ancient Indus Valley. Why were people from thousands of miles away living and working at Giza? These weren't conquered slaves or temporary traders. They were artisans, architects, and organizers, buried with honors alongside native Egyptians. It suggests something far deeper than conquest or immigration. It suggests collaboration. Ancient legends from multiple regions speak of a great knowledge lost in antiquity. Hindu texts describe Vimanas, flying machines, and cosmic architecture. Sumerian myths tell of Anunnaki, who brought civilization and structure. Despite centuries of speculation, the real builders of Egypt's pyramids may not have been Egyptians at all. In this video, you'll uncover the shocking truth behind history's greatest architectural wonder, and why historians might have gotten it wrong. If you discovered undeniable evidence that history got it wrong, would you speak up, even if nobody believed you? What if the ancient Egyptians weren't the original architects of pyramid technology, but the final stewards of something far older? Mainstream Egyptology frames the civilization as self-contained, a brilliant, isolated empire that independently achieved astonishing feats of architecture and science. But mounting evidence suggests otherwise. Archaeological discoveries hint at cultural and technological cross-pollination on a level rarely acknowledged in academic circles. Genetic testing on remains from pyramid-adjacent tombs shows non-native lineages, some from the Near East, others possibly from regions as far-flung as Anatolia and the Caucasus. These weren't war captives or common laborers. Many were buried with status, tools, and sometimes even engineering instruments. Even more striking is the presence of out-of-place artifacts, precision-cut stone tools inconsistent with the known Egyptian toolkit, and fragments of non-Egyptian script, Proto-Sumerian, or something eerily similar, found deep in construction layers at Giza, combined with the known reach of ancient trade routes stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean. This paints a picture of Egypt not as an origin point, but as a melting pot of inherited knowledge. Could it be that Egypt's great works were a collaboration, not in the modern sense, but in the form of inherited legacy? That the pyramids represent the crystallization of technologies and philosophies passed down from a forgotten age? Mainstream historians have little appetite for such speculation. The conventional narrative, neat, linear, self-contained, has been institutionally reinforced for decades. But the world doesn't move in straight lines. Neither does history. Troy was once dismissed as myth. So was Viking settlement in North America. Both were later validated by inconvenient evidence. So the real question becomes, what other chapters of human history are we still treating as fiction? If Egypt's pyramids were built just 4,500 years ago, why does the Sphinx show deep weathering consistent with thousands of years of heavy rainfall? rainfall Egypt hasn't seen since the end of the last ice age. This single anomaly has fractured the tidy timelines upheld by academic consensus and opened a floodgate of re-examination. Geologist Dr. Robert Schoch was among the first to suggest that the erosion patterns couldn't have formed in the arid climate Egypt has had since 2500 BCE. If he's right, the Sphinx could be twice or even 3 times older than currently believed. That would place its construction long before the rise of pharaonic Egypt, before the invention of writing, before agriculture fully took hold across the globe. In other words, into a time when humans were supposedly still primitive hunter-gatherers. But the Sphinx is just one puzzle piece. The alignment of the Great Pyramid with the constellation Orion, matched to its position in the sky around 10,500 BCE, adds further intrigue. Graham Hancock and others argue that this alignment was no accident, that the pyramids were a kind of message in stone, marking a date when something profound occurred or ended. Could the Giza Plateau have been the site of a much older civilization, erased by global catastrophe and inherited by later dynasties who didn't fully understand what they'd been given? If so, this wouldn't just rewrite Egypt's history, it would shake the very foundation of our understanding of civilization itself. It would mean that human beings possessed advanced architectural, mathematical, and astronomical knowledge long before the rise of Sumer, Babylon, or Egypt. Mainstream archaeology remains hostile to these implications. Dismissals often hinge on lack of textual evidence or cultural context, but if an advanced society was wiped out by flood, famine, or fire, how much would really survive? We accept that cataclysmic resets have occurred throughout history. Why is it so hard to believe they may have wiped away a chapter we've simply never found? At least not yet. We're told that the ancient Egyptians built the pyramids using copper chisels, dolerite pounding stones, and primitive ropes. Yet all around Giza, we see precision-cut granite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, carved, then hollowed, and shaped with tolerances of less than a millimeter. These aren't decorative anomalies. They're everywhere. Drill holes with uniform spiral striations, blocks with perfectly flat surfaces, joints so tight a razor blade can't slip between them. Modern engineers struggle to replicate this work even with laser-guided machinery. The idea that such results were achieved with stone tools and manual labor is not just improbable, it borders on absurd. Engineer Christopher Dunn has spent years studying these anomalies, concluding that advanced machining techniques must have been employed. Possibly ultrasonic drilling, high-torque lathes, or energy-based cutting tools that no longer exist in our records. These aren't fantastical theories. They're based on measurable tool marks, engineering analysis, and physical evidence that contradicts accepted history. But instead of being explored, they're largely ignored by academia, dismissed as misinterpretations or outliers. But why? Because to accept them would mean admitting that our timeline of technological evolution might be wrong, not just by centuries, but by millennia. And that opens a terrifying door. If this level of sophistication existed 5,000 or 10,000 years ago, where did it come from? And what happened to it? Some propose that a once advanced civilization collapsed, either through internal failure or sudden catastrophe. Others suggest that the tools were highly specialized, made of perishable materials, or simply removed by those who inherited the knowledge. Whatever the cause, one thing is clear. The methods used to build Giza are still beyond our grasp. So, why does the official narrative remain unshaken? Why do we keep teaching that a society using Bronze Age tools did what modern equipment can barely match? Because the alternative doesn't just challenge history, it threatens to rewrite it entirely. No conversation about the pyramids escapes the alien question. The idea that extraterrestrials built, or at least helped build the pyramids, has captivated millions, from conspiracy theorists to pop culture icons. It's been memed, mocked, and mainstreamed. And yet, it won't go away. Why does this theory persist? Not because of evidence for aliens, but because of frustration with the lack of satisfying explanations from Earth. When academics offer vague and untestable models involving massive ramps the size of small cities, the public senses the gap, then fills it with something big enough to make the impossible possible. The Great Pyramid contains no inscriptions claiming authorship, no blueprints, no mention of ramps or construction techniques in surviving Egyptian texts. And despite centuries of study, we still don't know exactly how it was built. Into this vacuum steps the alien hypothesis. To be clear, there's no hard evidence that extraterrestrials were involved, But dismissing the theory outright misses the point. Its popularity is a symptom, not a cause. Indigenous African traditions speak of ancestors who walked with the stars and built great cities before the flood. Is it possible that the Pyramid Project was not just Egyptian, but pan-cultural? That survivors of a pre-cataclysmic civilization gathered in Egypt, perhaps drawn by the Nile's stability and symbolism, to rebuild or protect fragments of what came before? Some even speculate that the first pyramid architects weren't building new monuments, but restoring ruins already ancient by their time. A multi-generational, multi-ethnic effort to preserve sacred geometry, cosmic alignment, and metaphysical knowledge in a stone form that could withstand catastrophe. This theory flips the script. Egypt becomes the receiver, not the inventor, of a global legacy. A civilization that became great because it protected something far older. We think of Giza as the beginning. What if it was the end of something else? Enjoying this deep dive? Hit subscribe and join us as we rewrite history, one fact at a time. Ancient Egypt was a civilization obsessed with documentation. From agricultural records and tax receipts to religious rituals and pharaoh lineages, the Egyptians wrote everything down, often redundantly, across tombs, temples, and papyri. Yet when it comes to the pyramids, their most colossal and enduring achievements, the silence is deafening. There are no construction manuals, no blueprints, no detailed inscriptions carved into the walls of the Great Pyramid crediting its builder. No mythic origin stories, no triumphal declarations. The largest and most precise structure ever built by the ancient world, and no one took credit? Official explanations suggest the builders simply didn't feel the need to record the obvious. But that's not consistent with the rest of Egyptian culture, which chronicled even minor construction projects and funerary preparations in elaborate detail. This isn't an omission, it's an absence. And that's something else entirely. Some scholars have suggested the knowledge behind pyramid construction was restricted to a priestly elite, a form of sacred science, passed down orally or encoded in symbols understood only by initiates. Others argue that the dynastic Egyptians may not have fully understood what they had inherited. They replicated forms, preserved traditions, but couldn't explain their origins. That would explain why later pyramids are technically inferior. They were imitations without access to the original method. More provocatively, there are signs of deliberate obfuscation. Chisel marks added to granite boxes long after they were carved. Later hieroglyphs imposed over older structures. Red ochre cartouches painted in inaccessible shafts, discovered only in the 19th century, under suspicious circumstances. If the pyramids were remnants of a forgotten age, perhaps the silence isn't accidental. Perhaps it was institutional, part of an effort to control the narrative, to rebrand inherited technology as native invention. Or perhaps the knowledge was considered too powerful, too sacred, or too dangerous to record openly. In ancient Egypt, silence wasn't ignorance. It was intentional. Scattered across the globe are ruins that seem to defy their context. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built over 11,000 years ago, showcases stone circles and symbolic carvings that predate agriculture and writing. The undersea structures near Yonaguni, Japan, resemble man-made terraces and megalithic formations, submerged beneath waters that rose after the last ice age. In Peru, Bolivia, and Indonesia, megalithic stonework appears suddenly, with no evidence of slow development. Mainstream archaeology treats each as a local anomaly. But what if they're connected? Some researchers believe these sites are not isolated wonders, but the last fingerprints of a forgotten global civilization. A technically advanced society that flourished before the Younger Dryas cataclysm around 12,000 years ago, then collapsed during a sudden climate shift, sea level rise, or comet impact event. If such a civilization existed, Egypt may have been one of its outposts, or one of its rebirth points. Survivors could have brought fragments of knowledge, geometry, astronomy, and monumental architecture, replanted in the fertile Nile Valley, where conditions were ideal for long-term preservation. That would explain why Egypt's architectural genius appears fully formed from the start, why there's no learning curve, why the oldest pyramids are the most advanced, and why similar design motifs, like solar alignments, step platforms, and sacred geometry, appear in civilizations that supposedly never contacted each other. Of course, admitting such a civilization existed would force a massive rewrite of human history. It would mean civilization didn't begin in Mesopotamia around 3000 BCE. It re-emerged there after a period of global trauma and amnesia. Göbekli Tepe was intentionally buried around 9000 BCE. Someone wanted it hidden, preserved for future time. Was it an ancient time capsule? A memory encoded in stone? If so, Egypt wasn't the beginning of human civilization. It was the aftermath. Let's do the math. Over 2 million stone blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, meticulously placed to form the Great Pyramid. No cranes, no steel, no wheels, and no concrete evidence for how it was done. The mainstream theory relies heavily on wooden sledges dragged over sand, perhaps lubricated with water, and monumental ramps that would have required more materials and manpower than the pyramid itself. Yet not a single trace of such a megastructure has ever been found. Engineering simulations show major flaws in the standard model. A straight ramp tall enough to reach the apex would need to be over a mile long and would collapse under its own weight. A spiral ramp? There's no evidence on the casing stones to support one. Internal ramps? Possible, but speculative, and still incapable of explaining how 70-ton granite beams were lifted and precisely placed inside the king's chamber. So if the accepted logistics don't work, what did? Some researchers propose a radical alternative, that ancient builders used lost principles of physics, possibly sound resonance, magnetic manipulation, or counterweight systems that no longer survive in our engineering vocabulary. Ancient myths speak of priests using chants to move stones, dismissed as folklore, but modern studies show acoustic levitation is real, albeit not fully understood. Then there's the question of time. According to Egyptologists, the Great Pyramid was constructed in just over 20 years. That would require placing one massive stone every 2 to 3 minutes, 24 hours a day, without error, for 2 decades. With what tools? With what planning? And why has no structure since, by Egyptian hands or anyone else's, matched its scale or precision? What we're looking at isn't a puzzle of brute strength. It's a riddle of method. And if we've lost that method, we've also lost a chapter of scientific history, one that may have held keys to forces and functions we've yet to rediscover. Picture the Nile not as a backdrop, but as the beating heart of a massive, hidden infrastructure project. Long before paved roads or rail systems, ancient Egyptians, or those who preceded them, may have engineered an intricate network of canals and docking systems specifically to move millions of tons of stone across great distances with startling efficiency. This isn't just theory. The Diary of Mirror, an ancient papyrus unearthed in 2013, describes limestone being shipped by boat from the quarries of Tura to Giza. It casually references the use of harbors and canal branches, details long ignored or overlooked by traditional narratives focused on overland transport. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have since revealed traces of long-buried waterways, some artificially straight, some aligned with construction axes, that suggest a logistical operation far more sophisticated than previously imagined. These canals weren't just opportunistic use of the Nile's floodplain. They appear to have been strategically dug and managed to control flow, elevation, and timing. This isn't ad hoc labor. It's system-level engineering. But here's where it gets even stranger. The level of planning involved, coordinating tides, seasons, cargo volume, and stone offloading, isn't matched in other aspects of early Egyptian infrastructure. There's no comparable canal system found tied to ordinary agriculture or temple construction. It's as if this logistical genius was applied exclusively to the pyramids, then forgotten. Was this knowledge lost after the Pyramid Age? Or was it borrowed, possibly repurposed from even older hydraulic systems laid down by a precursor civilization and rediscovered by early dynastic Egyptians? The silence in the historical record is telling. No detail maps, no follow-up documentation, just a flash of brilliance that appears and vanishes in the same breath. Maybe the pyramids didn't rise from the desert floor. Maybe they floated there. The Great Pyramid is not just a monument. It's a mathematical anomaly. Its dimensions encode constants like pi, the golden ratio, and even the speed of light when measured in certain units. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height equals 2 pi. Its slope encodes the golden ratio with astonishing precision. Coincidence? Possibly. But the alignments, proportions, and geometry are too consistent to be accidental. And it doesn't stop there. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with a margin of error of just 3/60th of a degree. Its base forms a nearly perfect square. The internal chambers and shafts point directly to significant stars: Orion's belt, Sirius, Thuban, each associated with ancient mythology and cosmic cycles. This goes far beyond symbolic alignment. It suggests a deep, functional knowledge of astronomy, geodesy, and harmonic resonance, the kind of knowledge typically associated with post-Renaissance science, yet found in a structure built thousands of years before Euclid, Pythagoras, or Galileo ever existed. So where did this knowledge come from? Mainstream scholars suggest it was the result of accumulated trial and error, refinements over generations of temple building. But the oldest pyramids are the most precise. The trend isn't forward progression, it's regression. Later pyramids are sloppier, smaller, and structurally unstable. That's not evolution. That's decline. Some researchers propose that the pyramid is a form of data storage, an archive of universal constants preserved in architecture, a message designed to survive global cataclysm. Others point to the use of sacred geometry in ancient sites across the world: Stonehenge, Teotihuacan, Angkor Wat, suggesting a lost global language of mathematics once shared among civilizations we now consider unconnected. Even more provocative theories suggest the pyramid wasn't just encoding knowledge, it was interacting with it, tuning into frequencies, resonating with the earth, acting as a harmonically tuned structure for energy, healing, or transformation. A machine, not a mausoleum. Whatever the case, the Great Pyramid is a calculator that still works, and its equations are asking questions we haven't yet learned how to answer. We've been told the Great Pyramid was a tomb, but it's a tomb that contains no body, no sarcophagus lid, no inscriptions claiming ownership, no funerary art, no treasures, no offerings, not even dust. The king's chamber is stark, silent, and unmarked by the rituals of death. So what was it? Some say it was an observatory. Its shafts align with stars of deep cosmological significance. Others argue it was a resonance chamber built to vibrate in tune with the Earth's natural frequencies. Some claim it was an energy device, converting underground aquifers and telluric currents into usable force, a hypothesis backed by the strategic use of different stone materials with varying electrical properties: limestone for insulation, granite for conduction. The layout of the pyramid itself adds fuel to the mystery. The Grand Gallery, with its precise angles, corbelled walls, and acoustic properties, doesn't serve a clear ceremonial or functional burial purpose. The Queen's Chamber lies empty, its shafts sealed. The subterranean chamber, hewn into bedrock far below, appears abandoned, unfinished, or intentionally left raw. Each space feels deliberate, but unexplained. And then there's the striking lack of evolution in pyramid design. If these were merely tombs, why were they never improved upon? Why did later dynasties abandon the style altogether in favor of rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings? The pyramid era doesn't end with a climax. It collapses in technical regression. That suggests the builders were following a very specific blueprint, one they either lost or could no longer replicate. And if they didn't fully understand the purpose, perhaps it wasn't theirs to begin with. If the pyramids weren't tombs, then every textbook, every museum plaque, every guided tour is built on a lie of convenience. Because the alternative, that the pyramids were machines, archives, or transmitters of something more than memory, doesn't just challenge what they were. It challenges what we are. Not every cover-up is smoke-filled rooms and shadowy cabals. Sometimes it's simpler and more insidious. It's a grant not renewed, a paper never peer-reviewed, a dig site quietly shut down under bureaucratic pretense. In the world of archaeology, suppression doesn't always look like conspiracy. It often looks like silence. Academic institutions are conservative by nature. Tenure, funding, publication all rely on adherence to accepted frameworks. Challenge those, and you don't just risk your career, you risk destabilizing the intellectual scaffolding of an entire field. That's not speculation. It's observable. Researchers who question the orthodox timeline of Egypt are often dismissed as fringe, regardless of credentials or evidence. Take Dr. Thomas DeBecke and Dr. Robert Schock, whose seismic surveys of the Sphinx revealed subsurface erosion inconsistent with Egypt's arid climate. Their findings suggested the monument was thousands of years older than traditionally believed. Instead of spurring widespread interest, their work was marginalized, brushed off as pseudoscience despite being peer-reviewed and based in geology, not speculation. There are also the stories you'll never see in journals. Artifacts that vanish into private collections before proper study. Skeletons unearthed at sites and quickly reburied when radiocarbon dating comes back wrong. Government ministries, Egypt's included, blocking foreign researchers from sensitive digs without explanation. You won't find those stories on Wikipedia, but you'll hear them whispered at conferences, in forums, and in late-night email threads between professionals who know what they've seen. Then there's the question of motive. Why suppress these anomalies? Because rewriting ancient history isn't just academic, it's political, cultural, and even theological. If a civilization with advanced knowledge existed before Egypt, then Egypt loses its primacy. Major religions lose a foundation. Textbooks, museums, and reputations crumble. It's not just that the truth is inconvenient. It's that entire careers have been built on the idea that there is nothing left to discover. And yet the ground keeps speaking, and some are still listening. For centuries, archaeology was limited by shovels, brushes, and luck. But that era is ending. A new kind of archaeology is emerging, one built on code,
Despite centuries of speculation, AI, the real builders of Egypt's pyramids may not have been Egyptians at all. In this video, you'll uncover the shocking truth behind history's greatest wonder of
artificial intelligence and why historians might have gotten ancient texts.
If you discovered undeniable evidence that
revealing
history
unexpected
got it wrong,
connections between
would you
distant
speak up
cultures.
even
It's
if
finding
nobody
recurring
believes you?
symbols in
What
Mayan
if the
codices,
ancient Egyptians
Sumerian
weren't the
tablets,
original
and
architects of
Egyptian
pyramid
walls,
technology,
symbols that may
but the
represent
final
a shared
stewards of
system
something
of thought
far older?
than
Mainstream
anyone assumed.
Egyptology
And it's doing it in
frames the
weeks,
civilization
not
as self-contained.
decades. LiDAR
Brilliant,
scanning is
isolated
revealing lost
empire
cities
that
beneath
independently
jungles,
achieved
hidden
astonishing
pyramids
feats
buried
of
beneath sand
architecture
dunes,
and science.
unnatural
But
geometric
mounting
structures
evidence
under
suggests
forests
otherwise.
long untouched.
Archaeological
In Egypt,
discoveries hint at
satellite
cultural
imaging has
and
uncovered
technological
entire substructures
cross-pollination on a
beneath the
level
Giza Plateau.
that's rarely
some
acknowledged in
symmetrical,
academic
some
circles.
eerily grid-like,
Genetic testing
hinting
on
that the
remains
visible
from pyramid
pyramids may be
adjacent
only the
tombs
surface
shows
layer of
non-native
something
lineages.
much larger.
Some from
Even
the
more
Near East,
radical
others
is predictive
possibly
modeling.
from regions
AI
as
can
far
now
flung as
ingest
Anatolia
centuries of
and the
archaeological
Caucasus.
data.
These weren't war
Weather
captives
patterns,
or common
linguistic
laborers.
structures,
Many were
and
buried with
identify
status,
where undiscovered
tools,
sites
and
are
sometimes
statistically
even
likely to
engineering
exist.
instruments.
In short,
Even
the machine
rainfall
doesn't
Egypt
just
hasn't
analyze the
seen
past.
since the end of
It
the
points
last
to where we
ice
should dig
age.
next.
This
And
single
here's where
anomaly
things
has
get
fractured the
uncomfortable.
tidy timelines
In multiple
upheld
instances,
by academic
these
consensus,
technologies are
and
validating
opened a
what
floodgate
so-called
of
fringe theorists
re-examination.
have argued for
Geologist
years. They're
Dr.
confirming
Robert
alignments
Schock
once
was
mocked
among the
as
first to
coincidence.
suggest that
They're
the
spotting
erosion
design patterns
couldn't
across
have
continents.
formed. In the arid
consistent,
climate
too
Egypt has had
advanced to
since
dismiss.
2500
If these
BC,
tools continue their
before
trajectory,
agriculture
we may
fully
soon
took hold
uncover
across the
definitive
globe.
evidence
If
of pre-Egyptian
the Sphinx is
civilizations,
just one puzzle
forgotten
piece.
engineering
The
techniques,
alignment of the
or
Great
even
Pyramid
lost
with the
languages buried
constellation
beneath our
Orion,
assumptions.
matched to
The
its
question
position
is,
in the sky
when that
around
happens, will we accept
10,500
it?
BC,
Or will the gatekeepers once again
further
decide
intrigue.
what
Graham
counts as
Hancock
real
and
history?
others argue that
Because
this
the past
alignment was
is no longer a
accident,
mystery
that
we
the
dig
pyramids
out of
were a
the ground.
kind of message
It's a
in
code
stone,
we're just starting to
marking
break.
a date when
The Great
something
Pyramid still
profound occurred
stands, but
or
what it
ended.
truly is,
Could the
who
Giza
built it
Plateau have been
and
the sole
why
one took credit?
remains hidden
They
in plain
replicated
sight.
forms,
Perhaps we
preserved
haven't
traditions,
uncovered the past,
but couldn't
only
explain that
disturbed
were
with
remnants
silence.
of a forgotten
Until the
age.
next layer
Perhaps
is
the
revealed,
silence
the
isn't
mystery
accidental,
endures.
or perhaps